The dust swirled like golden specks in the last rays of sunlight as Felicity Porter hurried down the main street of Yreka, California, clutching a crumpled letter to her chest. Her eyes filled with determination, even as they brimmed with unshed tears. The wooden sign for Hartwell's General Store hung crookedly ahead, and Felicity steeled herself for what awaited inside, knowing that once again she would have to face the humiliation of handing over correspondence she couldn't decipher to strangers who would judge her with their knowing looks and whispered comments. It was 1876, and Yreka was no longer the booming gold rush town it had once been, but it maintained a steady heartbeat of commerce and opportunity that had drawn Felicity after the death of her parents. At 23, she had arrived 3 months prior with nothing but a small trunk of belongings and the hope of starting anew in a place where nobody knew her secret shame. The secret that, despite her quick mind and capable hands, words on a page remained as indecipherable to her as ancient hieroglyphics. "Miss Porter," Mrs. Hartwell greeted her with that same pinched smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Another letter. My, how popular you are." Felicity swallowed hard, feeling the familiar burn of embarrassment creep up her neck. "Yes, madam. I believe it might be from my aunt in Sacramento. Would you be so kind as to read it for you?" the older woman finished, not bothering to lower her voice. "Of course, dear. Though I must say, a young woman your age really should have mastered her letters by now." She sniffed disapprovingly as she took the envelope, her bony fingers breaking the seal without ceremony. From behind the counter, Mr. Hartwell glanced up briefly, then returned to his ledger, his quills scratching methodically against the paper. In the corner of the store, Mrs. Wilson and her daughter exchanged knowing looks, their whispering barely contained behind gloved hands. "It seems your aunt is quite ill," Mrs. Hartwell announced, scanning the contents with raised eyebrows. "She writes that she cannot send for you as planned and suggests you find more permanent arrangements in Yreka." The news hit Felicity like a physical blow. The aunt she'd never met had been her last hope, the only family connection she had left. Now that tenuous lifeline was severed, leaving her truly alone. "Would you like me to pen a response for you?" Mrs. Hartwell asked, the condescension in her voice unmistakable. "No, thank you," Felicity managed to say, her voice surprisingly steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I shall consider the matter carefully before replying." She turned to leave, dignity intact but spirit crushed, when the store's door swung open with a creak. The man who entered seemed to bring the outdoors with him, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. Dust covered his denim pants and cotton shirt, and a worn leather hat sat atop hair the shade of dark honey. "Mr. Xavier, Mrs." Hartwell's tone transformed instantly to syrupy sweetness. "What a pleasure to see you in town." "Mrs. Hartwell," the man nodded politely, his voice deep but gentle like distant thunder. His eyes, however, settled briefly on Felicity, noting her flushed cheeks and the letter still clutched in Mrs. Hartwell's hand. "Just picking up some supplies," he said, moving toward the counter. "Johnson needs nails for the barn repair and we're running low on coffee." Of course," Mr. Hartwell said, suddenly animated. "The Silver Creek Ranch keeps us in business, Mr. Xavier." "How's that new breeding program coming along?" Felicity used the distraction to slip toward the door, eager to escape before more humiliation could find her. But as she reached for the handle, she heard Mrs. Hartwell's voice carrying across the store. "Poor Miss Porter here just received some disappointing news. Can't even read her own letters, imagine that. A grown woman, unable to make out her abs." Felicity froze, mortification rooting her to the spot as the store fell silent. She couldn't bring herself to turn around, couldn't bear to see the pity or contempt that would surely be reflected in the stranger's eyes. "Is that so?" The man, Mr. Xavier, replied after a moment, his tone revealing nothing. Unable to endure another second, Felicity pushed through the door and hurried down the wooden boardwalk, tears finally spilling over. She didn't stop until she reached the small room she rented above the milliner's shop, collapsing onto her narrow bed as sobs racked her body. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, but Felicity's spirit remained clouded as she made her way to the Silver Dollar Cafe, where she had secured employment as a waitress shortly after her arrival in Yreka. The owner, a gruff but fair widow named Mrs. Campbell, had taken a liking to Felicity's work ethic and quick memory. "You're up early, girl," Mrs. Campbell remarked as Felicity tied an apron around her waist. "Thought your shift didn't start till noon." "I couldn't sleep," Felicity admitted. "And I could use the extra hours if you have work for me." Mrs. Campbell's shrewd eyes studied her for a moment. "There's always work for willing hands. You can start by taking breakfast out to those men by the window, cowboys from Silver Creek Ranch. They're good tippers if you're quick with the coffee." Felicity nodded, gathering her composure as she filled a pot with fresh coffee and headed toward the table. Her steps faltered when she recognized one of the men as Mr. Xavier from the general store. Steeling herself, she approached the table, determined to be professional despite her embarrassment. "Good morning, gentlemen. Coffee," she offered, proud that her voice betrayed none of her inner turmoil. Three of the men nodded eagerly, pushing forward their cups, but Mr. Xavier watched her with thoughtful eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade. "Thank you, Miss Porter," he said quietly as she filled his cup. The sound of her name on his lips startled her, causing a drop of coffee to splash onto the tablecloth. "I'm sorry," she stammered, quickly dabbing at the spill. "No harm done," he assured her. And then, as if sensing her discomfort, he turned back to his companions, resuming their conversation about cattle prices and the coming winter. Throughout the morning, Felicity was acutely aware of his presence, though she took pains not to look in his direction more than necessary. When the men finally rose to leave, the others filed out while Mr. Xavier lingered, placing his payment on the table with a generous tip. "Miss Porter," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "I wanted to apologize for Mrs. Hartwell's behavior yesterday. It was unkind." Felicity's cheeks burned. "There's no need, Mr. Xavier. What she said was true after all. I cannot read." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Many good people never had the opportunity to learn. It doesn't diminish their worth." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and strode out, leaving Felicity staring after him, a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with embarrassment. For the next week, Felicity threw herself into her work, rising before dawn and returning to her room long after sunset, too exhausted for her thoughts to dwell on her encounter with Mr. Xavier or the looming uncertainty of her future. With her aunt's illness, she would need to find a way to support herself permanently in Yreka, and waitressing at the Silver Dollar barely covered her modest expenses. It was during a rare afternoon off that fate intervened. Felicity had ventured to the small creek just outside town, seeking solace in the peaceful burble of water over stones. She sat on a flat rock, her simple blue dress spread around her, watching a pair of sparrows dart among the branches overhead. "Miss Porter." The voice startled her, and she turned to find Mr. Xavier standing a few yards away, leading a chestnut mare by the reins. "Mr. Xavier," she acknowledged, quickly rising to her feet. "Please call me Samuel," he said, approaching cautiously as if afraid he might frighten her away. "I didn't mean to disturb your solitude." You didn't, she assured him, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. I was just enjoying the quiet, he nodded, understanding in his eyes. It's hard to find peace in town sometimes. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the soft nickering of his horse and the continuous melody of the creek. Miss Porter, Mr. Xavier, they both spoke at once, then laughed, the tension easing slightly. Please go ahead, Felicity offered. Samuel removed his hat, running a hand through his son's streaked hair. I have a proposition for you, Miss Porter, a job offer of sorts. Felicity's interest piqued immediately. What kind of job? Silver Creek Ranch needs a housekeeper, he explained. Our previous one, Mrs. Hoffman, has gone to live with her daughter in Oregon. The position includes room and board and the pay is fair. Hope flickered in Felicity's chest. A position with housing would solve her most pressing concern. But why offer it to me? We hardly know each other. Samuel's expression grew serious. Mrs. Campbell speaks highly of your work ethic. And he hesitated, then continued with careful honesty. I believe you might appreciate a fresh start away from the gossip of town. Felicity knew he was referring to her illiteracy and the whispers that had begun to follow her after Mrs. Hartwell's public revelation. The thought of escaping those judgmental eyes was tempting indeed. What would my duties entail? She asked, practical considerations coming to the fore. Cooking for the ranch hands, keeping the main house in order, mending when needed, Samuel listed. It's not easy work, but it's respected. You'd have your own room in the main house with Sundays off. Felicity considered the offer carefully. Working on a ranch would be different from anything she'd done before, but the prospect of leaving town's scrutiny behind was compelling. Who else lives in the main house? Just me, Samuel replied. My father passed 2 years ago, and I've been running the ranch since. The hands have their own bunkhouse. Under normal circumstances, a young, unmarried woman living under the same roof as a bachelor would raise eyebrows, but Felicity sensed that Samuel Xavier was a man of honor. Besides, her options were limited, and her instincts told her to trust him. I accept your offer, Mr. Xavier Samuel, she said firmly. When would you like me to start? Relief and something else, satisfaction, perhaps flashed across his features. Would tomorrow be too soon? I can come by with the wagon to collect you and your belongings. They agreed on a time, and as Samuel mounted his horse to leave, he paused, looking down at her with those storm cloud eyes. One more thing, Miss Porter. If you'd be amenable, I'd like to teach you to read. Felicity's breath caught in her throat. Why would you do that? Samuel's expression softened. Because everyone deserves the chance to read their own letters. With those words, he rode away, leaving Felicity standing by the creek, her heart filled with a cautious hope she hadn't felt in years. True to his word, Samuel arrived the following afternoon with a wagon, helping Felicity load her modest trunk and bidding goodbye to Mrs. Campbell, who seemed genuinely sorry to lose her. The journey to Silver Creek Ranch took almost an hour, winding through rolling hills dotted with oak trees and cattle. The ranch has been in my family for 3 generations, Samuel explained as they traveled. My grandfather staked his claim during the gold rush, but he was smart enough to invest in cattle rather than chasing dreams in the mines. Felicity listened attentively, asking questions about the operations and memorizing details that might help her in her new position. She learned that Silver Creek employed 8 full-time ranch hands, with more hired during the busy seasons, and that in addition to cattle, they raised some of the finest quarter horses in Northern California. As they crested a hill, the ranch spread out before them, a sprawling main house of whitewashed wood with a wide porch, several outbuildings, corrals, and a large red barn. In the distance, Cattle grazed on green pastures bisected by the silver ribbon of water that gave the ranch its name. "It's beautiful," Felicity breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. Samuel's face showed quiet pride. "It's home." The welcome Felicity received at Silver Creek surprised her. Johnson, the grizzled foreman who had been with the family since Samuel was a boy, showed her around the kitchen with gruff kindness. The cook, Elena Martinez, a middle-aged woman who came 3 days a week to prepare special dishes and teach Felicity her recipes, embraced her like a long-lost daughter. "The kitchen is yours now, Nina," Elena declared. "I show you everything I know." By the end of her first week, Felicity had settled into a routine. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the hands, spent the morning cleaning and organizing the main house, prepared lunch, and then tackled whatever special projects needed attention mending, preserving, or baking. In the evenings after dinner, once the kitchen was spotless and the next day's bread set to rise, she would find Samuel waiting in the study with a lamp lit and books spread on the table. Their first lesson was tentative, both of them uncertain of this new dynamic. Samuel had selected a primer typically used for children, but he presented it with such matter-of-fact respect that Felicity felt no shame in tracing her finger under the simple words. "A is for apple," she recited, following his example. "B is for boy." "Good," Samuel encouraged, his deep voice gentle. "The letters make sounds that blend together to form words. With practice, you'll begin to recognize them without thinking." Night after night, they sat together in the warm glow of the lamp, Samuel's patient instruction guiding Felicity through the basics of reading. Sometimes they worked for an hour, sometimes longer, depending on how tired Felicity was from her day's labor. Always, Samuel treated her with respect, never showing frustration when she struggled or forgot something they had covered previously. "My father taught me to break difficult tasks into small steps," he told her one evening when she was particularly discouraged after mixing up several letters. "You're trying to climb a mountain all at once. Let's just focus on the next foothold." As the weeks passed, Felicity's confidence grew not only in her reading but in her role at Silver Creek. The hands appreciated her cooking, especially her light, flaky biscuits, and Samuel often commented on how the house had never been so well organized and welcoming. One evening in late October, as the first chill of autumn crept into the air, Samuel came in from a long day of moving cattle to winter pastures. Felicity had a hot meal waiting and noticed the stiffness in his movements as he shrugged off his coat. "You're favoring your right shoulder," she observed, setting a plate before him. Samuel grimaced. "Old injury. Axe up in the cold." Without thinking, Felicity moved behind him and placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the knotted muscles beneath his shirt. "My father had similar trouble after a logging accident," she explained, beginning to work the tension from his shoulders with practiced movements. "I used to help him like this." Samuel went completely still under her touch, and Felicity suddenly realized the impropriety of her actions. She was about to pull away when he exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That helps." She continued for a few more minutes, her cheeks warm but her hands steady, before retreating to fetch him coffee. That night's reading lesson seemed charged with a new awareness between them, though neither acknowledged the shift. The following Sunday, Felicity's day off, she was surprised when Samuel invited her to ride with him to a neighboring property where he needed to discuss a potential business arrangement. "It's a beautiful day for a ride," he said, "and Mrs. Thomas makes an exceptional apple pie." Unless you had other plans, Felicity had intended to spend the day catching up on her personal mending, but the prospect of an outing was too tempting to refuse. "I'd be delighted," she said, hurrying to change into her best dress, a modest navy blue with a white collar. Samuel had saddled a gentle mare for her, and though Felicity had limited riding experience, he was patient, showing her how to mount and control the horse with subtle pressure from her knees and light hands on the reins. The Thomas farm was an hour's ride away, and along the journey, Samuel pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area's history. Felicity found herself laughing more than she had in years, especially when he recounted his own youthful misadventures. "You actually hid in the hayloft all night?" she asked, giggling at his tale of escaping punishment for tracking mud through his mother's freshly mopped kitchen. "Until the barn cats decided I was invading their territory," Samuel confirmed with a rueful smile. "I surrendered to my mother's wrath around dawn, covered in hay and cat hair. She made me mop the entire house for a week." At the Thomas farm, Felicity was introduced as Miss Porter, Silver Creek's new housekeeper, but she noticed the speculative glances Mrs. Thomas cast between her and Samuel. The older woman's warmth never faltered, however, and true to Samuel's word, the apple pie was extraordinary. "You must share your crust recipe," Felicity said as they prepared to leave, genuinely impressed by the delicate, flaky pastry. "I'd be happy to, Mrs. Thomas replied, then added with a meaningful smile, "You should come to our harvest social next month. The whole community gathers for dancing and food. Silver Creek always has a strong showing." On the ride home, with the sun beginning its descent toward the western hills, Felicity found herself studying Samuel's profile against the golden light. In the 3 months since she'd arrived in Yreka, her life had transformed completely from a friendless, jobless young woman hiding a shameful secret to someone with purpose, respect, and growing skills. And much of that change was due to the man riding beside her. "Why did you really offer me the position?" she asked suddenly, the question that had lingered in her mind finally finding voice. "The truth, please." Samuel slowed his horse, turning to meet her gaze directly. "The truth," he considered for a moment, then spoke with characteristic honesty. "I recognized something in you that day in the general store, dignity in the face of cruelty. It reminded me of my mother." "Your mother?" Samuel nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "She came from the East, well-educated and refined. She taught school before marrying my father. But she never looked down on those without her advantages. She believed everyone deserved a chance to learn, to improve their circumstances." They rode in silence for a while before he added quietly, "And perhaps I saw in you someone who might bring life back to a house that's been too quiet for too long." The admission hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address. But as they rode back to Silver Creek Ranch side by side, Felicity felt a deepening connection to this thoughtful man who had offered her not just employment, but dignity and opportunity. That night, as they sat down for their reading lesson, Samuel presented her with something new, a small journal bound in soft leather. "I thought you might like to practice your letters by keeping a record of your thoughts," he explained. "Writing reinforces reading and—" He hesitated, then finished. "Sometimes it helps to put our feelings on paper when we're not ready to speak them aloud." Felicity ran her fingers over the smooth cover, deeply touched by the gift. "Thank you, Samuel. I'll treasure it." Their eyes met across the table, the lamplight casting a warm glow over his features, and for a breathless moment, Felicity thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he cleared his throat and opened the primer to the page they'd been working on the previous evening. "Shall we continue where we left off?" As November arrived, bringing shorter days and frosty mornings, life at Silver Creek settled into a comfortable rhythm. Felicity's reading skills improved steadily, and she had begun to write simple sentences in her journal each night before sleep. Most were straightforward observations about her day or reminders of tasks, but occasionally, when she was feeling particularly brave, she would write Samuel's name, tracing each letter with careful attention. The ranch's preparations for winter kept everyone busy. Hay was stacked in the barn, repairs were made to outbuildings, and Felicity worked alongside Alina to preserve the last of the garden's bounty. She learned to make sausage from the fall butchering and helped smoke meat for the winter months, tasks that left her exhausted but satisfied. One particularly cold evening, as Felicity was setting bread dough to rise for the morning, Samuel entered the kitchen with an armful of firewood, his cheeks ruddy from the chill outside. "The hands say there's a storm coming," he announced, depositing the wood in the box beside the stove. "Johnson's bringing the last of the cattle down from the high pasture tomorrow." Felicity nodded, wiping flour from her hands. "I'll prepare extra food. They'll be hungry work in the cold." Samuel lingered, watching as she efficiently covered the dough with a cloth. "You've adapted to ranch life remarkably well," he observed. "It's as if you've always been here." The simple compliment warmed Felicity more than the blazing stove. "I've never felt so at home anywhere," she admitted, "even with all the hard work." "Perhaps especially because of it," Samuel suggested. "There's satisfaction in labor that has clear purpose." Their eyes met, and Felicity felt the now familiar flutter in her chest that occurred whenever Samuel looked at her with that particular intensity. Before either could speak further, however, a commotion outside drew their attention. Johnson burst through the door, his weathered face grave. "Boss, one of the hands hasn't returned from checking the north fence line. Young Billy. With this weather turning, I'm worried." Samuel immediately shifted from relaxed ranch owner to decisive leader. "Get 3 men and lanterns. I'll saddle the horses." "I'll pack food and coffee," Felicity added, already moving to the pantry. Within minutes, a search party was assembled in the yard. As Samuel mounted his horse, Felicity handed him a satchel containing provisions and a small flask of whiskey. "Be careful," she urged, concern evident in her voice. "The temperature's dropping fast." Samuel's gloved hand briefly covered hers where it rested on his saddle. "We'll find him," he promised. "Don't wait up, this might take hours." But of course Felicity did wait up, keeping the stove hot and a pot of coffee ready. She prepared a hearty stew that could simmer indefinitely and mixed dough for cathead biscuits that could be quickly baked when the men returned. As the hours passed and the wind began to howl outside, she found herself repeatedly drawn to the window, peering anxiously into the darkness for any sign of returning riders. It was well after midnight when she heard the thunder of hooves in the yard. Felicity rushed to the door, lantern in hand, her heart pounding with relief and apprehension. The scene that greeted her sent a chill through her body that had nothing to do with the bitter night air. Samuel was dismounting, supporting the limp form of a young man barely more than a boy, really, while Johnson and the others hurried to help. Billy's face was alarmingly pale, his lips tinged blue. "He's alive but badly chilled," Samuel called to Felicity as they carried the young ranch hand toward the house. "We need to warm him slowly. Can you prepare the guest room?" Felicity sprang into action, racing upstairs to ready the rarely used guest bedroom. She built up the fire, piled on extra blankets, and quickly heated bricks to place at the foot of the bed. By the time the men carried Billy upstairs, the room was warm and welcoming. "His horse threw him and bolted," Samuel explained as they worked together to remove Billy's frozen boots and outer clothing. "He walked for miles in the wrong direction before taking shelter in a hollow. If Johnson hadn't insisted on checking that area, we might not have found him in time." Once Billy was settled under the blankets with warm bricks at his feet and a cup of hot broth that Felicity coaxed between his blue lips, color began to return to his young face. Only then did Felicity turn her attention to the search party, ushering the exhausted men to the kitchen where food and coffee awaited. As the ranch hands ate gratefully, recounting the search between mouthfuls of stew and biscuits, Felicity noticed that Samuel remained standing by the stove, his own plate untouched. "You should eat," she urged quietly, approaching him. "You need to restore your strength." Samuel looked down at her, fatigue evident in the lines around his eyes. "You've done remarkably well tonight, Felicity. Your quick thinking may have saved Billy's life." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it, combined with the intensity of the night's events, sent a tremor through her. "We saved him together," she corrected gently. "Now please eat something before you collapse." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, madam." The storm that had threatened arrived with full force by morning, confining everyone to the ranch buildings for 3 days. Felicity divided her time between her regular duties, tending to Billy as he recovered, and continuing her reading lessons with Samuel. The forced proximity in the storm-bound house created a strange intimacy, with quiet conversations by the fire and shared tasks taking on new significance. On the evening of the 3rd day, as the storm finally began to abate, Felicity found Samuel in his father's study, poring over account books by lamplight. "I've brought you some tea," she said, setting down a steaming cup. Samuel looked up gratefully, rubbing his tired eyes. "Thank you. I'm nearly done." Instead of leaving, Felicity lingered, drawing courage from the isolated feeling the storm had created, as if they existed in a world apart from ordinary constraints. "May I ask you something personal?" Samuel's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Of course." "Why have you never married?" The question had been on her mind for months, though she'd never dared voice it before. "You're not lacking in prospects, surely?" For a moment, Samuel looked taken aback by her directness, but then he chuckled softly. "No, I suppose not. There have been opportunities." He set down his pen, giving the question proper consideration. "After my father died, the ranch demanded all my attention. Before that—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I never met anyone who made me want to change my life until—" He stopped abruptly, his eyes meeting hers with an expression that sent heat coursing through her veins. "Until," Felicity prompted, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel rose from his chair and moved toward her with deliberate steps. "Until a woman walked into Hartwell's store clutching a letter she couldn't read, yet holding herself with more dignity than anyone else in the room." He stood before her now, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Felicity," he said, her name a caress on his lips. "I've tried to maintain proper distance because of our arrangement, but I find myself thinking of you in ways that have nothing to do with your position here." Her heart thundered in her chest. "And how is that?" "As the woman I want to build a future with," he answered simply. "If you could consider—" Whatever he intended to say was lost as Felicity, emboldened by his confession, rose onto her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. For an instant, Samuel remained motionless, surprised by her initiative, but then his arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as he returned the kiss with barely restrained passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I should have asked permission first," he murmured. "You already had it," Felicity assured him, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I've been writing your name in my journal every night, practicing my letters and dreaming of a moment like this." Samuel laughed softly, the sound rumbling through his chest where she was pressed against him. And here I thought I was being so professional and restrained. Perfectly proper, she agreed with a teasing smile, except for the way you look at me when you think I don't notice. His expression grew serious then, his hands framing her face with tender reverence. Felicity Porter, I'm falling in love with you. Not because you keep my house immaculate or cook the best biscuits in California, but because of your courage, your determination, and the way you've brought light back into my life. Tears of joy sprang to Felicity's eyes. I love you too, Samuel, more than I thought possible. Their second kiss was deeper, a promise exchanged without words, and when they finally parted, both knew that everything had changed. Yet practical considerations remained. What happens now? Felicity asked. I can't continue as your housekeeper if we're courting. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. You're right. Propriety must be maintained. A smile touched his lips. Perhaps Mrs. Thomas might be persuaded to chaperone until we determine the course of our relationship. The solution was both proper and practical, and over the coming weeks, as winter settled in earnest over Silver Creek Ranch, Mrs. Thomas became a frequent visitor. She supervised as Samuel and Felicity continued their courtship, offering shrewd observations and occasional advice while teaching Felicity the finer points of managing a large ranch household. Their reading lessons continued as well, though now they often ended with stolen kisses and whispered endearments. By Christmas, Felicity could read simple stories aloud and write letters without assistance, achievements that filled her with pride and Samuel with admiration. On Christmas Eve, with Silver Creek blanketed in snow and the house decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, Samuel hosted a celebration for the ranch hands and nearest neighbors. Felicity, wearing a new green dress that Samuel had ordered from Sacramento, moved among the guests with newfound confidence, her status as the ranch owner's intended clear to everyone present. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Samuel led Felicity to the quiet of his study, where a small fir tree sparkled with candles and homemade ornaments. I have something for you, he said, retrieving a small package from his desk. Felicity unwrapped it carefully to reveal a book, not a primer or simple reader, but a leather-bound volume of poetry. Opening the cover, she found an inscription written in Samuel's strong hand. To Felicity, who reminds me daily that the most important lessons are those of the heart. With all my love, Samuel. Tears blurred her vision as she traced the words with her fingertip, overwhelmed by the significance of a gift she could now truly appreciate. I can read it, she whispered, awe in her voice. Every word, Samuel agreed, his own voice thick with emotion. But there's one more gift. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Felicity's breath caught in her throat as he knelt before her, opening the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a perfect pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. Felicity Porter, these past months have shown me what I was missing in my life. You've filled Silver Creek with warmth and purpose again, but more importantly, you've filled my heart with love I never thought to find. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Yes, Felicity breathed without hesitation, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. Yes, Samuel, I will marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to claim her lips in a tender kiss, Felicity marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a shamed, illiterate young woman to the future mistress of Silver Creek Ranch, beloved by a man who had seen her worth when she couldn't recognize it herself. Their wedding took place the following spring, when the hills around Yreka turned emerald green and wildflowers carpeted the meadows. The entire community gathered to witness the union, including Mrs. Hartwell, whose pinched smile seemed genuine for once as she congratulated the bride she had once humiliated. "You look radiant, Mrs. Xavier," the older woman said, using Felicity's new title for the first time. "Samuel is a fortunate man." "We both are fortunate," Felicity replied graciously, secure enough in her happiness to forgive past slights. "Life has a way of leading us where we need to be, even through difficult paths." As she spoke, her eyes found Samuel across the crowded churchyard, his proud smile warming her from within. She excused herself from Mrs. Hartwell and made her way to her husband's side, accepting his arm as they greeted their guests together. "Happy, Mrs. Xavier," Samuel murmured, bending to speak close to her ear. "Completely," Felicity assured him, leaning into his strength. "Though I still have much to learn." Samuel's laugh rumbled through his chest. "As do we all, that's the beauty of it." Later that evening, as they stood on the porch of Silver Creek Ranch, now truly her home, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Felicity reflected on the remarkable changes a single year had brought. "I was thinking," she said, nestled against Samuel's side, "that perhaps we might offer reading lessons to any of the ranch hands who are interested. Not everyone had the advantage of a patient teacher by lamplight." Samuel looked down at her with profound love and respect. "I think that's an excellent idea, Mrs. Xavier. Your experience gives you a unique ability to understand their challenges, and to appreciate the difference it makes," she added softly, "to be able to read one's own story." As the years passed, Silver Creek Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Felicity's reading program expanded beyond the ranch to include children and adults from neighboring farms, meeting twice weekly in the converted bunkhouse that Samuel had renovated for the purpose. Her own reading and writing skills continued to improve until she could tackle even the most challenging literature, often reading aloud to Samuel in the evenings as they sat before the fire. Their first child, a son they named William after Samuel's father, arrived a year after their wedding, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth. Both children inherited their mother's quick mind and their father's steady temperament, and from an early age they were taught the value of education and compassion. On a warm summer evening in 1882, as Felicity sat on the porch watching 6-year-old William teaching his little sister how to form letters in the dust, Samuel joined her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Look at them," he said with quiet pride. "Elizabeth can already write her name and she's not yet 5. Felicity covered his hand with her own, a lump forming in her throat. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life," she admitted, "from shame to such happiness." Samuel settled into the chair beside her, taking her hand in his. "You earned every bit of it, my love. Your courage in facing what frightened you most changed not only your life, but the lives of everyone you've taught since." Indeed, Felicity's reading program had helped dozens of people throughout the region, from ranch hands to miners' children to newly arrived immigrants. Many had gone on to better jobs or further education, opportunities that would have been closed to them without the basic literacy skills she helped them develop. "We changed each other's lives," she corrected gently. "You were as lonely as I was lost when we met." Samuel couldn't deny the truth of her words. "Silver Creek was just a place before you came," he acknowledged. "You made it a home again." As twilight deepened around them, William and Elizabeth abandoned their letters to chase fireflies in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Felicity leaned her head against Samuel's shoulder, contentment filling her heart. "You remember telling me that first night that reading would open a world of possibilities?" she asked. "I remember everything about those nights," Samuel replied. "The way the lamplight caught in your hair, how your brow would furrow when you concentrated, the pride in your eyes when you read your first complete sentence. Felicity smiled at the memories. You never made me feel ashamed, not once. You gave me dignity along with knowledge. You already had dignity, Felicity. I merely recognized it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children's games and the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. After a while, Felicity spoke again, her voice thoughtful. I received a letter today from a woman in Oregon who heard about our reading program. She wants to start something similar there and asked for my advice. Samuel turned to her with interest. What will you tell her? That the most important quality in a teacher isn't knowledge but patience, Felicity replied, and that everyone deserves the chance to learn, regardless of their age or circumstances. You should write a proper guide, Samuel suggested. Share your methods with others who might want to start similar programs. The idea took root in Felicity's mind, growing stronger in the following months until she began setting aside time each day to document her teaching approaches, the challenges she'd encountered, and the solutions she'd developed. By the following year, her handwritten manuscript had grown to over 100 pages. It was Samuel who surprised her by arranging for it to be printed by a publisher in San Francisco, presenting her with the first bound copy on their 7th wedding anniversary. Reading by Lamplight, a guide to teaching adult literacy by Felicity Xavier. She read aloud from the title page, her voice trembling with emotion. Samuel, I don't know what to say. Say you'll sign my copy, he replied with a tender smile. I want the author's signature in the first edition. With steady hands that had once trembled at the sight of written words, Felicity inscribed the book to her husband. To Samuel, who taught me that the greatest stories begin when we have the courage to turn the page. All my love always. The guide circulated widely throughout California and beyond, eventually finding its way into schools and community programs across the Western Territories. Letters arrived regularly at Silver Creek Ranch, thanking Felicity for her insights and sharing success stories from far-flung reading classes, inspired by her methods. On the 15th anniversary of their first meeting, Samuel and Felicity returned to Yreka for a special occasion, the opening of the town's first public library, a project they had supported generously. As the ribbon was cut, and townspeople streamed into the modest but well-stocked building, Mayor Wilson acknowledged the Xavier's contribution. Thanks to the vision and generosity of Samuel and Felicity Xavier, our community now has access to books and learning opportunities that will benefit generations to come, he announced to enthusiastic applause. Later, as they walked arm in arm through the town that had once been the site of Felicity's deepest shame, she paused outside Hartwell's General Store, now under new ownership. I never imagined that day when I stood here clutching a letter I couldn't read that it would lead to this, she mused. Life takes such unexpected turns. Would you change anything? Samuel asked, studying her face in the afternoon sunlight. Felicity considered the question seriously. Not a single moment, she decided. Every step, even the painful ones, led me to you and to the work that gives my life meaning. That evening, as they prepared to return to Silver Creek Ranch, where their children, now teenagers with dreams and plans of their own, waited with Alina's grandchildren, who helped manage the household, Felicity discovered an envelope tucked into her traveling bag. Inside was a letter written in Samuel's distinctive hand. My dearest Felicity, 15 years ago today, I witnessed a brave young woman stand tall in the face of humiliation, and something in my heart recognized its match. What began as admiration grew into respect, then friendship, and finally the deepest love a man could know. You came to Silver Creek seeking refuge and instead became its heart and soul. You transformed not only your own life through determination and courage, but the lives of countless others through your teaching and example. Our children carry your strength and compassion in their blood. Our community is richer for your generosity. And I, your devoted husband, am blessed beyond measure to walk through life at your side. As we celebrate this anniversary, I want you to know that teaching you to read by lamplight was never a burden, it was the privilege that led me to my greatest joy. With all my love, today and always, Samuel. Tears blurred Felicity's vision as she carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her bodice, close to her heart. Samuel had given her many gifts over the years: a home, a family, his unwavering love and respect, but perhaps the greatest gift had been helping her find her own voice, both on the page and in the world. As their carriage departed Yreka, heading toward the rolling hills of Silver Creek Ranch, Felicity's hand found Samuel's, their fingers intertwining with the familiar comfort of two people whose lives had become beautifully, irrevocably entwined. "Thank you for the letter," she said simply. Samuel's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "Thank you for reading it." In that moment, with the setting sun painting the landscape in hues of gold and the future stretching before them like an open book, Felicity Xavier knew that her story, once limited by shame and illiteracy, had expanded into something far richer and more meaningful than she could have ever imagined on that fateful day in Hartwell's General Store. It was a story still being written, page by page, day by day. In the shared life she and Samuel had created, a story of love, learning, and the transformative power of believing in someone's potential, even when they couldn't yet see it themselves. And like all the best stories, there were chapters yet to come,